Pete Carroll was fired by the Seattle Seahawks in a shocking move. Why did it happen? Who is the next head man in Seattle? We're going to talk about that on today's edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Let's roll.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tyler Rowland, local expert from Locked On Titans. My co-host, Alex Clancy from Locked On Cardinals, will be joining the show shortly. We got major news. The Seattle Seahawks have parted ways with Pete Carroll. It was a shocker to the NFL world on Wednesday. Why did this happen? Who will be the next coach of the Seattle Seahawks? I'm going to break that all down. Before I get into it, I do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. That is right. A shocking development, something that not a lot of people expected to happen. The Seattle Seahawks have parted ways with Pete Carroll. Carroll was there for 14 seasons. Of course, we know that Pete Carroll won a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks, but it looks like there was, just a feeling in the organization that it was time to move on. And there are even rumors now from the reports coming about Pete Carroll that he could even move into a front office role for the Seattle Seahawks. I think the Seahawks just needed a change. They just needed to go with a different direction. And you don't want to be ageist in any way or whatever. But at the end of the day, Pete Carroll is 72 years old. That is one of the oldest coaches in the NFL. And you would imagine from Pete Carroll's standpoint that maybe getting an opportunity to retire, getting an opportunity to calm down, getting an opportunity to maybe not be so hands-on and so interactive every single day like you have to be an NFL coach, that might be something that makes sense to him. So I'm sure Pete Carroll doesn't want to totally get out of football. He's a football lifer. I would imagine it would be hard for him to completely step away. Me personally, I want to work until I die because I love what I do, and I'm sure Pete Carroll probably feels the same. But again, the day-to-day grind, the year-long grind of being an NFL head coach at 72 years old, that might not be something that Pete Carroll wants to do. And again, moving into a front office role, continuing to have a role within the team, continuing to have a voice within the organization, I think that makes a ton of sense for both sides. Now, obviously, the conversation will quickly turn to who should be hired, who should be the head coach for the Seattle Seahawks. Now, obviously, there are a lot of candidates out there right now that could make a lot of sense. But when you're going to make a list, you have to start with Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn is currently the defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. He's going to be a hot commodity on the coaching hiring cycle this offseason. He's already getting requested to interview with multiple teams, including the Tennessee Titans, the team that I cover on a daily basis. So Dan Quinn would make a lot of sense. He obviously spent time in Seattle. He was a guy who had a lot to do with that cover 3 Legion of Boom style of defense that the Seahawks played and that led them to a championship. He's going to have previous relationships in the building. He's going to know people in the front office, again, workers, staff. He might have still some connections there to some of the players that have been around. So I think Dan Quinn would make a lot of sense for this team. And the other name that you have to consider is somebody who's already there, and that's offensive coordinator Shane Waldron. So we saw Waldron work with Geno Smith last year and lead him to a fantastic season that kind of put his career back on the map. They wrote Geno off, and he didn't write back. Well, somebody who was backing Geno Smith the entire time was Shane Waldron. So Waldron is the current offensive coordinator of the Seahawks, was a guy who may have been discussed as a potential head coaching candidate, and he could just get the promotion, get put up into the big boy chair, and take the head coaching job for the Seahawks. I think that's something that would make a ton of sense. Now, if you want to combine those two things together, I think that is where you find the most logical destination for the Seahawks. So you want to continue offensive continuity with Geno Smith. You want to continue that. One of the big problems with having a defensive coach in the NFL is if your offensive coordinator is good, he's probably going to get hired to be a head coach somewhere else. And that makes it difficult to keep that cohesion and keep that continuity that you want on the offensive side of the football, especially between the guy calling the plays and the quarterback. So you can keep that together and keep Shane Waldron as the offensive coordinator. But on the other side of that, have Dan Quinn come over and be the head coach, be a guy with experience as a head coach, and allow him to run the defense the way that he used to when Seattle was at their peak. So I think that while Dan Quinn and Shane Waldron are the number one and number two names that pop up to you right away, the combination of those two may make the most sense, especially if Shane Waldron doesn't get a head coaching opportunity, which he's a name that is mentioned, but I don't really see Waldron as one of the top 10 candidates to get a head coaching job this offseason. So if you keep Waldron in his current role, have Dan Quinn come over to be the head coach and take over the defense, that can make a ton of sense for Seattle, and there's a ton of familiarity there. Now, if the Seahawks want to look outside the organization, you're going to look at a coach who's a ready-made coach, a coach that can take over right away and lead them to victory. Obviously, names that make a lot of sense. Bill Belichick, if he's eventually let go by the New England Patriots, which that situation is still in flux. Mike Vrabel, who was just let go by the Tennessee Titans that I cover on a daily basis over at Locked On Titans. Mike Vrabel is a guy who you don't necessarily want him to build your engine, but if you got a ready-made Ferrari in the fastest car, he's somebody who can get in the driver's seat and make sure that you win. You know, it's like some of these college programs that have so much talent. You don't really need somebody who's this gifted schematic coach. You need a leader of men who's going to be an adult in the room and push things forward. So I think that Mike Vrabel would make sense for Seattle. I think Bill Belichick would make sense for Seattle. And I also think a guy like Jim Harbaugh could maybe make some sense for Seattle. Again, these are coaches who are going to want to take over a team that is ready to win, not take over a Carolina, a Washington, a Tennessee Titans, a team that you kind of got to build up a little bit. You're going to be looking at teams like the Chargers, teams like the Falcons, and again, a team like the Seattle Seahawks who are close to a playoff berth, who made the playoffs last year, have a quarterback in place, and have some talent on the roster. So Pete Carroll out as the Seattle Seahawks head coach could continue in a role within the organization. That's not confirmed, but could happen. And then look at Shane Waldron, look at Dan Quinn, look at some of these coaches that are looking for a ready-made winner. They could make a lot of sense for the Seattle Seahawks. But monster news, and if you're wondering, Tyler, where is Alex? Well, the reality is we recorded our show for today before the Seattle Seahawks news dropped, but this is the biggest story in the NFL, and here at Locked On NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network, we're never going to come on here and not give you the biggest and best news with the biggest and best ideas and takeaways. So a little wonky. You might hear some weird things in the rest of the show where I'm teasing segments we don't get into, where things sound a little wonky. That may be the case, but more important to us here at the Locked On Podcast Network than anything is giving you the biggest news of the day. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But with that being said, we got to talk about a disaster in Chicago and also talk about some wild card teams that could be dark horses for the Super Bowl. So Alex will be joining me here in just a second. Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, around New Year's, we all get obsessed with how to change ourselves instead of just expanding on what we're already doing right. Maybe you finally organized one part of your space. You want to tackle another. Maybe you're taking supplements every morning, and now you just actually want to eat breakfast too. Therapy helps you find those strengths so you can ditch those extreme resolutions and make changes that will really stick. Look, I've worked with BetterHelp before. It was incredibly beneficial to me. I was moving, season was starting, a lot going on, and I really just needed to ground myself. And especially this time of year when people, again, have all these extreme resolutions they want to take, being able to ground yourself and find what really works is so key. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient. It's flexible. It's suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. And with how important, in my opinion, it is to have a therapist that fits for you, BetterHelp couldn't make it any easier. So make sure that you celebrate the progress that you've made and set yourself up to make more. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon and get 10% off your first month today. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you for making the Locked On NFL podcast your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, NFL content all year long on all apps. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I am one of your hosts, Tyler Rowland, local expert from Locked On Titans, here with my co-host, Alex Clancy, local expert from Locked On Cardinals. But Alex, the big news on Wednesday, the Chicago Bears will not be firing Matt Eberflus, their head coach. He will be sticking around for at least one more season. But as we see pretty often in the NFL, he was forced. Maybe not forced. Maybe he wanted to. Who knows? But he fired pretty much everyone on his offensive coaching staff. Fired offensive coordinator Luke Getsy, fired the quarterback coach, the wide receiver coach, the running back coach, the tight ends coach. And Alex, I'm not going to lump you into this, but I got to say, this is a massive, massive mistake by the Chicago Bears. Look, I know that Matt Eberflus had that team playing well. They were competing at the end of the season. But at the end of the day, anytime that you do something like this, the writing is on the wall. You are literally having a coach fire all of the guys that he decided to bring in. It is a complete lack of faith and a complete lack of vote of confidence in Matt Eberflus, because you're telling him, hey, you may be an okay coach, but you hired a bunch of bad coaches for our offense, and now you got to change it. And like I said on Twitter, Alex, for me, this is like when couples share a Facebook, okay? When you have Dawn and Jane Williams on Facebook, okay? The relationship may not be over yet, but we are one step away. And I got to give shout out to Lauren Cox, the host of Locked On Bears, and make sure that you go check out Locked On Bears if you want more information about this. But Lauren said that they're going to try to have a baby to save the marriage here. And he talked about getting a quarterback at number one and getting like a Caleb Williams to try to save the relationship. And to me, you're just making a massive mistake. I'm very vocal about the fact that offensive coaches are who you want as your head coach, because if you have a good offensive coach and he's not the head, or if you have a good offensive coordinator, he's going to get hired to be a head coach. So even if they hire a new offensive coordinator and they draft Caleb Williams or Drake May as their quarterback of the future, well, if that OC is any good whatsoever, you're going to be looking for a new offensive coordinator in a year or two, and then you're going to lack continuity and lack cohesiveness with your young quarterback on a rookie contract. So to me, if you're that unsatisfied with what has happened on the offensive side of the ball with the Chicago Bears, then you need to just fire Matt Eberflus too, because if he comes out next year and he fails, now you're just going to fire him and look for someone new. And now your rookie quarterback is in flux. He's getting different conversations. So to me, the Bears, if they wanted to do a massive change on the coaching staff like this, then they just needed to go ahead and fire Matt Eberflus as well. So I know that I've ranted and raved here to start, but I had a strong take on the situation in Chicago. And again, I think the Bears are making a massive mistake here.
Yeah, I don't see it that way.
Ding.
Sure.
It felt like around the horn there for a second, right? When I made my point, got a little ding. I felt like I got a point.
Tony Reale would have given you -10 for that stance. So you're lucky you were not around the horn.
All right, tell me why I'm wrong.
There's merit to it for sure. You know, Eberflus could have gone either way. The defense was playing inspired football the last 6 weeks or 8 weeks of the season. And the reason why Matt Eberflus still has his job is because he's not an offensive head coach. Because if he were, he would have been fired, because he would not have got out of Justin Fields what everybody wanted, whether it be his fault or not. Now, pivoting to in Ryan Poles we trust over there is room for so much growth with that number one overall pick, and that's obvious.
Right.
So my first thought is, why not bring Lincoln Riley and be the OC, bring Caleb Williams in and call it a day? I mean, that's a Chicago thing. It's like if they were going to hire Jim Harbaugh, which they're not because they're sticking with Matt Eberflus, something weird is going to happen in Chicago going with Caleb Williams, because Ryan Poles isn't done. Okay, they cannot get this wrong. And if you keep Matt Eberflus, you have to bring in a no doubt about it offensive coordinator to run the offense. And I think while offensive head coaches sure have taken over the charge of winning Super Bowls now, Bill Belichick won a whole bunch of Super Bowls, defensive-minded head coach. Okay? And I know that it's Bill and it's Brady and things like that, but
right.
I think it's almost better to have a defensive-minded head coach, to have an offensive coordinator who is in full control of the offense. That's his entire job. And I think that could benefit a young quarterback, where a lot of times for me, offensive-minded head coaches, you still got to coach the team, and then you got to call the plays, and then you've got to handle, egos, and you've got to do all the stuff that a head coach does and call the plays. That's not easy.
Right.
That's not easy. Okay, so keep it easy. Hire a stud offensive coordinator. Have Caleb Williams come in. Have him run the offense. Matt Eberflus be the head coach, and make sure that defense is top 10 next year. That's it. They have 2 picks. They have their own pick. So they could draft the best. They could draft Dallas Turner. They could draft the best interior defensive lineman. That defense needs to be great next year, or Matt Eberflus will lose his job.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Now, one name that I want to put in there, Lincoln Riley, I don't think it's a bad idea because I like keeping it. I don't know if he would leave a head coaching. Right. You're just throwing it out there. But one name that I do think would make some sense for the Chicago Bears is Frank Reich. Frank Reich just got fired as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. And look, it has been my position as a person who went against, not me directly, but covered the team that went against Frank Reich a ton when he was the head coach of the Colts. Frank Reich is not a good head coach. I don't think, I think he's a good offensive play caller. I think he's a good offensive coach. He clearly doesn't have the ability to be a head coach in the NFL, and I think that's played out, and I don't think he's going to get another opportunity anytime soon. Well, where did Matt Eberflus come from? He was the defensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts who was the head coach? Frank Reich. So now Eberflus extends that olive branch that he was extended, bring in Frank Reich, who worked with Andrew Luck and has shown that he can nurture and manage a young quarterback into one of the better quarterbacks in the league. You bring in Frank Reich, who you don't have to worry about getting pulled away to be a head coach again, and have him pair with your young quarterback. And now you might have an opportunity to create some consistency and do what you need to do. So I think that's definitely a possibility. Alex, we'll be quick on this, though. Do you think they go with the number 1 rookie quarterback, or do you think they stay with Justin Fields?
I don't think you pass on Caleb Williams now.
Not for Justin Fields, especially with the contract situation and the extra years of cheap contract. I think you're 100% right, and I think the struggles that Fields had at the end of the season, especially in that Packers game, I think that probably nailed that home. So I agree with there.
Before we pivot, because you're looking at draft picks, is it going to be Atlanta? Is it going to be somebody else? Is it going to be the Jets to sit behind, what's his name? Aaron Rodgers. There's every team, 15 teams need a quarterback. Okay. Yeah. And Justin Fields would be an upgrade over many, not always, but his greatness, his peaks are better than a lot of the young quarterbacking in the NFL nowadays. Yeah. Or this year. Look for a player for player. Maybe they want a linebacker and a 5th round pick. They don't. It doesn't need to be a draft pick.
Yeah.
So
you're 100% right.
It'll be fascinating to see what they do on draft day with him, or keep him. You could keep him also, and just not trade him, and see who the best quarterback is.
Yeah, they could run. I just think Atlanta is such a great fit. A coach goes to Atlanta who wants to win right away with all of that talent on that roster. You don't have a draft pick to get one of the top quarterbacks. You don't want to rely on a rookie quarterback. Go in there, get Justin Fields and Bijan Robinson running the ball down your throat. Oh, yeah. I think that has a ton of potential, but I guess it does depend on who will be the coach. We are going to move forward. There's some wild card games to play this weekend, ladies and gentlemen. Which of these wild card teams could be a dark horse to win the Super Bowl? We're going to talk about that in just a second.
This episode of Locked On NFL Thursday is brought to you by Jace Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? Because according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in a decade, which is scary. And I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than, a family member getting sick while a supply chain issue keeps them from life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff, could really happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code Locked On to get $20 off your order. Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Tyler Rowland, Locked On Titans. We are Locked On NFL Thursday. Thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen. Free wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Tyler and I could do 2 hours every Thursday. Literally. Just so you know, we leave so much on the cutting room floor, on the kitchen table floor, kitchen floor, whatever. That we have no time for shenanigans at this point. We got to rip through these games. So, Tyler, we've got a bunch of football this weekend. Okay. Mm-hmm. There are 6 technically wild card teams that are in action this weekend. The Cleveland Browns, Miami Dolphins, and Pittsburgh Steelers in the AFC, and the Eagles, the Rams, and the Packers in the NFC. Mm-hmm. Pick one of each. The dark horse for you to maybe make a run, not to win a Super Bowl, but make one.
Well, I'll say this. All of my top picks when I was doing this in my head are in the AFC. So that makes it tough, but I like that. I like the challenge. For me, if I'm picking one in the NFC, it's the Los Angeles Rams. The Los Angeles
What did I
Rams,
tell you 3 months ago?
I know. You were right. I am giving you the flowers here. The Rams have a Super Bowl winning head coach. They have a Super Bowl winning quarterback. They have reestablished their flow on the offensive side of the ball with a ton of good weapons, with Kyron Williams, Puka, and Cooper going together. And I think that on the defensive side of the ball, they obviously have stars that they can count on, or at least they still have Aaron Donald in there, and they have a really good defensive coach. So to me, I really like the Packers. Obviously, the Eagles have that pedigree. I almost went Packers, but I decided to be a little less saucy and say that the Rams, because, hey, they have a coach who's done it. They have a quarterback who's done it. And at the end of the day, that's very important. And the Rams going into Detroit with all of the relationships between those two franchises. What an incredible game on Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to say the Rams have the best dark horse potential of any wild card in the NFC. In the AFC, or do you want to do your NFC?
Yeah, let me do my NFC. I think it's the Eagles. Okay. I mean, I'll still take the best roster in football to kind of turn it around. We'll see right away because they play Monday night where everybody's watching on the road in Tampa Bay. They should win that game by 2 touchdowns. If they lose that game, Rome will burn in fifth. That's it. That'll be it. Nick Sirianni could get fired. Like Gino Camilleri and Louis DiBiase, seeing their glass cage of emotion over the last 3 months has been fascinating to watch because nobody saw this coming. But it's the Eagles for me because I'll take Jalen Hurts, even though I like when I'm right. It's rare that Matthew Stafford, I wish that MVP awards were through the entire season because if they make the Super Bowl, he should be MVP. And the one last thing I'll say about Detroit and the Rams, very rarely do we have a situation where they're going to hug it out after. There's no bad blood. Everybody won that trade. There was zero winner more than the other of that trade. They won a Super Bowl. Detroit got picks, and they've completely changed the face of their organization. Yeah. And they'll thank Matthew Stafford along the way. Now, I will do my AFC because I know that this is tough for me too. It's Cleveland. And I didn't know why it was Cleveland. I thought about this because I knew we were going to talk about this in some capacity today.
Before you go, can I ask you one more thing about the Eagles?
Sure.
I just have to point out how hilarious it is that the Tennessee Titans fired Mike Vrabel after 6 seasons, and people are acting like the sky is falling. And Nick Sirianni went to a Super Bowl last year. They're a double-digit win team that went to the playoffs, and if he loses one playoff game, they're all ready to fire him. As I cover the Titans, you cover the Cardinals. Let's be honest, they're very low on the totem pole in terms of respected NFL franchises. It's just wild how mediocrity is accepted one place and zero patience in the other place. It's just funny how the two different fan bases think about things. Man, the NFL is king, ladies and gentlemen. Woo! God, this is so great. Playoffs are here. Things are rolling. Stick with us here on the Locked On NFL podcast. It's your team every day. But I'm Tyler Rowland, local expert for Locked On Titans. That's Alex Clancy, local expert from Locked On Cardinals. As I tell you every week, start your weekend early and stay safe out there.